question, is this butter back? Why, yes or no?
Well, Igor, it's a pleasure to be with you and have this opportunity to engage in dialogue again. So one of the popular memes around the world these days is that butter is back. The first thing I have to say from someone living in America is butter was never gone, and so it can't be back. You go to a restaurant in the United States, and 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, you sit down at a table at any restaurant or diner, and they bring bread and butter to the table. And they've always brought bread and butter to the table. So butter was never entirely gone. The issue now is butter back in the sense that it has been exonerated? So it's, we were concerned about adverse health effects, and now suddenly it's good. And then the bigger issue surrounding that is saturated fat okay for us now? And the simple answer is no. It's important to note that not all saturated fat is the same, and some is clearly more harmful than other varieties. But here's what we know about butter. It's certainly better for us than partially hydrogenated oil, and some stick margarines in the past were made out of partially hydrogenated oil or trans fat. But we've long known that butter is a better choice than trans fat. Almost anything's a better choice than trans fat. But there is no evidence that adding butter to the diet confers a health benefit. There's still all sorts of reasons to be concerned about adverse health effects, and there are important environmental effects of getting our fats from dairy farming, which is a separate concern. But here's something we know for certain. Olive oil in the diet confers net health benefit. And so for me, I haven't eaten stick margarine in decades. So if butter were to come back into my diet, what would it replace? Well, I dip my bread in olive oil, and it would have to replace that. And that's clearly a bad idea. The olive oil is decisively better for me than the butter. So, like everything else that happens in the world of nutrition, when medicine meets the media, the message has been massively distorted. We have no evidence that butter confers a net health benefit. There are some questions about whether certain fatty acids in dairy are less harmful than we once thought they were. But compare that to, for example, a Mediterranean diet rich in olive oil, which is associated with longevity and vitality, optimal health outcomes. There's just no comparison. None of the world's best diets feature a significant contribution by butter. None of them, whether they're vegetarian or vegan or Asian or Mediterranean. Whereas some of the world's best diets feature a significant contribution by olive oil. So no, butter is not back in that sense. I have much bigger concerns about bacon than I do about butter. At least dairy farming, there's an argument there that this is something that we can do in ways that are reasonable for the environment, and questions about the place of dairy in healthy diets are challenging questions. Some of the world's best diets include dairy. That's true of Mediterranean diets. Some of the world's best diets exclude dairy. That's true of vegetarian and vegan diets. But processed meat plays virtually no role at all in any of the world's best diets. So how bacon evolved into almost a cultural joke here in the United States. That basically there's a competition in advertisements to see who can use more bacon and who can put bacon into more creative places, like putting it inside the crust of the pizza. I think that's a travesty, and I think it's tragic, because processed meat is decisively and consistently associated with adverse health outcomes. It's associated with increased risk of chronic diseases, it's associated with cardiovascular disease, it's associated with premature mortality. And within the past year or two, the World Health Organization has identified processed meat as an important carcinogen. And the evidence linking processed meat consumption, and bacon is a processed meat, with increased risk of cancer is quite strong. The other thing to consider is how bacon is produced. It involves raising and slaughtering pigs, These are highly intelligent animals. I hate to talk about it, but the simple reality is that very often there are horrible abuses and considerable cruelty involved in the slaughter of these animals. And the environmental costs are absolutely staggering. There's nothing cute, there is nothing amusing about the use of bacon as a garnish in our food supply. And frankly, the world needs to eat much less meat for the sake of the planet, for the sake of the environment, water, the climate, and all of that. But in terms of human health effects, there is no argument for including bacon in the diet. There could be an argument for those who are so inclined to include fish or seafood or lean meats, game, but processed meats like bacon, there is no argument for it based on health. There's no argument, certainly based on environmental issues. The only argument for bacon, the only one, is that it tastes good and people like it. And so one final comment about that, the foods we like are the foods we're used to. So if you eat bacon all the time and you like it, you'll continue to like it. If you shift to a more wholesome diet and take bacon out, you'll forget about it and you'll learn to love the foods you're with. And that's what I think everybody should do. There's no question that the cooking oil, the kitchen oil, most consistently and convincingly associated with health benefit is olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil, cold pressed, that's the best because you get not just the rich concentration of monounsaturated fat, but with the extra virgin olive oil, cold pressed, you also get a pretty high concentration of antioxidants that are native to the olive. So in terms of cooking traditions, the flavor profile, the tolerance of heat, olive oil is just about as good as it gets. There is this fascination now with coconut oil, despite the fact that there is no convincing literature linking coconut oil consumption to health benefits. Unlike olive oil, where the literature is consistent and totally convincing, there's really no convincing literature linking coconut oil with health benefit. Now, what are the reasons to include coconut oil in the diet anyway? Well, it has a very nice flavor profile, and it's a highly saturated oil. It's very rich in a fatty acid called lauric acid, and the evidence is pretty convincing at this point that lauric acid isn't very harmful. It may not be harmful at all. I'm not finding in the literature any evidence that it confers benefit like olive oil does, but it may not be harmful. And so if there are times when the culinary properties of coconut oil are advantageous for you, where it works better in food preparation, using it occasionally for that reason I think would be fine. Now the other oils that I tend to favor are canola oil. There's a lot of fuss being made that this is a product of genetically modified crops, and sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. Usually not. Usually the rapeseed has been modified with standard breeding techniques. But canola oil has an extremely favorable fatty acid profile, and in particular you can get high omega-3 canola oil, and the advantage of canola oil relative to olive oil is the very mild flavor, so you can use it in recipes where you wouldn't want the flavor of olive oil to come through. People, I think, traditionally have been worried about soybean oil because it's very high in omega-6 fat, but there's a new variety of soybean oil that is slowly overtaking the market in the United States and increasingly around the world. And again, selective breeding of soybean plants to produce an oil that is high in monounsaturated fat like olive oil, also rich in omega-3 and very low in omega-6. That's a beautiful profile, and soybean oil stands up very well to heat. So in the Katz family kitchen, you aren't likely to find coconut oil. We may have it very rarely and use it very occasionally, although more often when we want coconut in a recipe, it's whole coconut or coconut milk. But the cooking oils we rely on all the time are olive oil, that's number one for sure, and canola oil when we don't want the flavor of the olive oil. And those two get most of the job done. And if you're doing high temperature cooking, deep frying, and you know, I don't know that there's much reason to be doing that, then you may need to extend that portfolio of oils you have in your kitchen out a little bit. But again, in terms of scientific evidence and the world's great culinary traditions, olive oil maintains its place as the top choice. Fat sources in my diet, first would be nuts and seeds, and then you could extend that to nut butters, almond butter and so forth. But nuts and seeds, olives and olive oil, avocado, and then we still include in my family's diet some fish and seafood, so we're getting some fat there. So when I eat salmon, obviously I'm getting fat from there. But those are the principal sources of fat in my diet, and I get a fair amount of fat from those sources, and I'm not looking to minimize my fat intake. I'm not looking to maximize my fat intake. I don't really worry too much about my fat intake. What I do make sure is that the fat in my diet comes from wholesome sources, and it's the best kinds of fat. And I think where it lands is generally somewhere around 20% of my calories, but it's not like I'm aiming for that particular target. I just choose every day wholesome foods and sensible combinations. Well, my wife has a beautiful free recipe site called Cuisinicity.com. So it's like cuisine city, but with an I in the middle, Cuisinicity. And she did a post about sugar based on many of my columns, and the title she used was Put Sugar in Its Place. And her point as a cook who makes absolutely wonderful food, and you can help yourself to all those recipes, is that if you don't drink soda, if you don't drink if you don't eat highly processed junk food, if you don't mistakenly buy foods that have added sugar where it doesn't belong, because sugar is routinely added to bread and crackers and pasta sauce and salad dressing, if you avoid all of that, if you don't eat sugary breakfast cereals, there isn't much sugar in your diet throughout the day, and then when it's time for dessert, if you want to put a little bit of sugar in a really great recipe, there's room for it. You're still way below the average intake of sugar. You're way below the level of sugar intake that's likely to be harmful. And what you get by using a little bit of sugar in the right place is pleasure. And, you know, frankly, I think food should be pleasurable. And the tagline at Cuisinicity is love the food that loves you back. And the idea is that I want to be healthy and vital. I get pleasure out of that. But I want to eat food that I enjoy eating, and I can have both. So that's what we do. We put sugar in its place. So the sweetener in my diet is actual sugar from cane most routinely, and maybe sometime from sugar beets. Other than that, we use other flavorings that pretty much obviate the need for sugar. So, you know, for example, a lot of people will add sugar to oatmeal. I never do, but I may add fresh fruit. And the fruit is sweet. That does the job for me. So I would say a sweetener in my diet is blueberries, and a sweetener in my diet is raspberries, and a sweetener in my diet is strawberries, and a sweetener in my diet is an apple, and a sweetener in my diet is a banana. Exactly. No, I eat bananas almost every day. Yeah, and you know, again, there are all sorts of discussions we could have about this. What about artificial sweeteners? I avoid them. I have concerns about them. They're intensely sweet. I think they corrupt your palate. I think they make you favor very sweet food. There may be some advantages. If you consume a lot of sugar now and you're trying to cut back, switching from regular soda to diet soda may very well be better. But I think you want to keep going. You want to use that only as a stepping stone. And this is a really important point, Igor. If you eat highly sweetened things all day long, if you drink soda routinely, fruit doesn't taste sweet to you because it's less sweet in comparison. But if you don't do that, if you eat a diet of wholesome foods, your palate is much more sensitive. There are times I mix berries in with my whole grain cereal for my breakfast, and I think, gee, this is a little too sweet. I haven't added any sweetener. It's just, you know, the berries are so sweet because my palate's sensitive. And everybody's palate can be rehabilitated. There are some new sweeteners available and coming into the market. There's stevia, there's monk fruit extract. And I do think they look promising, you know, for people who need to add some sweet to their diets, would like to avoid the calories and the glycemic effects of sugar, and aren't comfortable with the currently available artificial sweeteners. And it looks like stevia may have some metabolic advantages related to insulin levels and so forth. So I think there are some options. In terms of all of the caloric sweeteners like agave nectar and different varieties of sugar and white sugar versus brown sugar and molasses and honey, there are all sorts of health claims made, but it's a lot more hype than science. And the simple reality is most of us have a lot more added sweeteners in our diets than is good for us, and we really ought to cut down the total quantity and just leave sugar in that place where it can confer the greatest addition of pleasure in relatively small quantities. And again, for help with that, the recipes on Cuisinisty will kind of guide you in that direction. As you well know, Igor, the mission of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine is exactly that, to use lifestyle as medicine, and not just to use it to keep healthy people healthy or make people healthy, but also to use it to treat and reverse disease. But you're asking a bigger question: how do we get our colleagues to buy in? And you know, there are many challenges, because it's our colleagues that we need to convince, but it's our culture that we need to overcome, right? So, you know, if someone has diabetes and they're prescribed a medication, they don't go outside the door and immediately get bombarded with temptations to not take their medication. But they do get bombarded with temptations to abandon the good advice they just got about diet or physical activity. So yes, we need to persuade our colleagues that lifestyle is incredibly effective medicine, and we do that the way healthcare professionals always persuade one another, with evidence. The evidence is very strong. Evidence proving what lifestyle can do, that it can reverse coronary disease, that it can prevent and reverse diabetes, that it can have stunning effects on weight, that it can change the expression of our genes in a way that reduces the risk for cancer. All of that evidence is available, that it can change the length of our telomeres, caps at the ends of our chromosomes that correlate with life expectancy. So we have all of that evidence, but the other thing we need to do is convince one another that if we focus on lifestyle, we can actually get our patients to change their behaviors. Part of that is relying on our patients to do the hard work of changing behavior, but I think part of it also needs to be changing our cultures. Here in America, we have these advertising campaigns that run constantly that basically tell people giant-sized bacon cheeseburgers are wonderful things, and highly sugary cereals are fine for kids' breakfasts, and donuts are fine for breakfast, and toaster pastries are fine for breakfast. Our culture tells us this every day. What is the likelihood that patients are going to be able to follow good advice they get from a healthcare professional when they go out into a culture that tells them, don't listen, it's fine, have the bacon cheeseburger, have the toaster pastries, have the donuts? We have to get those two things aligned. The evidence is overwhelmingly in our favor, but we have to do lifestyle in medicine, where healthcare professionals advocate for this, and we have to do lifestyle as medicine, where all of us together are advocating for culture change so that the world doesn't conspire against our efforts.